Okay, so it is 8:29. I'm still waiting for a couple of people to log on, but for the people that are here, I was just telling Sheila a little bit about my parents. So I guess some of you knew my parents and some of you don't. So I will give just a short introduction. My father was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in why am I not seeing? Okay. My father was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1949. His birthday actually would have been, his 71st birthday would have been next week on October 20th. And he lived his whole life in Memphis. He did go to the University of Iowa and graduated from there. And he and my mother got married in 1972 and spent 6 months in Israel, and then had to go back to Memphis suddenly when his father passed away. And they were always very, very connected to Israel and wanted to live here very, very much. And couldn't make their dream happen. My father grew up in a traditional family. They went to the Barenhurst Synagogue, which was an Orthodox synagogue in Memphis. But he deepened his relationship with Judaism at the Hillel at the University of Iowa, and also during their time in Israel. And he always was a very avid reader. He would read anything he could get his hands on. He was very into Kabbalah, and for a long time, I didn't really appreciate that as much. But after he passed away, I was the recipient of most of the library. And I've been, going through his books. My great grandfather came from Europe and had an amazing collection of Judaica books. So I actually cataloged all of those books that we had. And then I was also looking through my father's books. And actually this summer, after Rav Steinsaltz, Yahrtzeit passed away, I picked up the 13 Petaled Rose, which is a wonderful book by Rav Steinsaltz, it's subtitled A Discourse on the Essence of Jewish Existence and Belief. And it's very, very clearly written. I mean, he didn't write it in English. He wrote it in Hebrew and it was translated. But the English is very, very clear, and it goes through just very basic concepts in Judaism that are rooted in Kabbalah, but he explains it in such an incredible way. And what was amazing was when I opened this book that was my father's, I found a boarding pass from a trip to Israel that they had made in 2015. I think I also found the receipt from where he bought it. But anyway, so I was reading through this book and I got to the section on prayer. And it really, it touched me for a couple of reasons. It was, I should also say that this shiur, now that I think we're all here, the shiur is Le'ilui Nishmat Avraham Leib ben Chaim VaHinda. Leonard Lubin, his neshama should have an aliyah. So anyway, when I started reading this book by Rav Steinsaltz and reading about prayer and just having him set out his thoughts so clearly and in such a way that that it made me realize that everyone, even people that have been praying for their entire lives, have what to remember about prayer or to renew for themselves. So I felt that it would be a good idea to give a shiur. In some sense, this is sort of an introduction to prayer, but it can also be a way of deepening your prayer experience for people that have been praying all along. And also, I don't know, coincidentally or not coincidentally, Avi and I have been learning the Rambam, the Mishneh Torah, which is the Rambam setting out all of his halachot. And he starts from the very beginning, basis of Judaism. And one of the very earliest sections is Hilchot Tfilah, the laws of prayer. And so going over that, it made me realize that there are just very basic concepts in prayer, which is the foundation of prayer, that we can all be reminded of. And along with all of that, we had the Yamim Noraim, we had the high holidays, and we were suddenly, most of us, thrust into this situation where we were praying alone. And we had to think, what does that mean? Individual prayer versus communal prayer. Like usually we sort of, we all take a ride on the backs of our community. And that helps us along in these days of prayer that could sometimes be very challenging because the words are different. It's a very long service. So in some ways I thought to myself, well, how can I give this shiur after the high holidays? They're done, they're over, we're done with that. But I realized that my prayer experience is actually assisted during the high holidays by my daily practice of prayer. Because it's something that I do. I pray every morning. I daven. I've been, I don't know exactly. I can't even think back to when I started. I mean, obviously in school we had tefillah every morning. I hear some of my teachers from the Margolin Hebrew Academy, Mora Rivka, and we all had to daven every morning. But that doesn't necessarily mean when you're in college you get up and daven, or when you need to go to work in the morning you make time to daven before you start your day. But that is something that I have managed to do through everything. And, I was in therapy once and my therapist was like, you are so disciplined. You daven every morning. And it's not something that I really think of as, it's just something I do. I guess some people make a cup of coffee and I daven in the morning. But because I have that practice, it actually makes high holiday services much easier for me. And when I was talking about, what did we do for the high holidays? We davened with our kids. We didn't go out to shul. We didn't take advantage of any of the minions in the parks and the whatever. We davened at home with our kids. And for me, it was very natural and very meaningful. And so all of that together made me want to give this shiur to try to give over how anyone can create a meaningful daily practice where they connect with God. And it's something that's very possible, and it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to involve a lot of words that you don't understand. But a little bit later on in the shiur, I want to get into how, if you do adopt some of the more traditional methods of prayer, that can help you during more unique prayer times. Like if you have a concrete daily practice, if you have a daily practice that feels natural to you, then when you're thrust into a situation where things are more unusual, you're less surprised by it, and you can, sort of flow with that a little bit more. So I was supposed to organize things before we started, and I didn't. So hold on one second. Okay. I shared this source sheet on Safaria. Some of you might have seen it. I can share it in the chat actually, but I'm just going to show it I'll share it in the chat, and I'm also going to share my screen. So hold on a second. Here we go. So here's the source sheet, and I'm also going to share my screen, and here we go. Okay, oops, there we go. So here's our source sheet. So that's what I titled this shiur, Creating a Meaningful Daily Practice. and we're going to start with the first halacha in the Rambam. This is the Rambam Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Tfilah v'Birkat Kohanim. This is the laws of prayer and the priestly blessing. They're all together in Sefer Ahava, right? Sefer Ahava. Okay, so his first halacha says, the English is over here on the side. You can look at it. I'm going to read the Hebrew. Mitzvat aseh v'hitpalel b'chol yom shene'emar v'avadatem et Hashem Elokechem. So it's a positive commandment to pray daily. And how do we know this? He quotes a verse from Shmot. This is actually in the middle of Parshat Mishpatim, which says that you must serve God. Mipi hashmua lamdu she'avoda zohi tefillah. So this kind of service or work is interpreted to be prayer. Shene'emar, how do we know that? He quotes another verse, and this verse you might recognize from Shema. Ulavdo b'chol levavchem. You should serve him with all your heart. Amru chachamim, ezo hi avodah shebalev, zo tefillah. So the Chazal, the rabbis, said, what kind of service do we do in your heart? Because normally if you're doing some sort of service, it's a physical thing, a physical work, but what kind of service do you do in your heart? So this is prayer. Okay, so we know basically that our daily requirement is to pray. So, and then he adds, Ve'ein minyan tfilot min haTorah. So there's no, according to the Torah commandment, the biblical commandment, there is no set amount of prayer. Ve'ein mishneh hatfilah hazot min haTorah. And the mishneh, the wording, the nusach, the exact words of the tefillah are not from the Torah. Ve'ein latfilah zman kavua min haTorah. And the biblical requirement of prayer has no fixed time. So later on, that's not what this shiur. So, and that is basically what this shiur is going to be about. What is a biblical prayer? And a biblical prayer is something that comes from the heart, that also, it's not constrained. On the one hand, it's not constrained by time or words or amount, but it's also not defined. So it actually leaves you a lot of space to play with, because your prayer could be very long or it could be very short. Basically, it's just some sort of avodah shebalev, some service of the heart, and it's towards God, which is critical here, because the idea of prayer is that it is our opportunity to connect with God. So we're going to go ahead and read the next halacha in the Rambam, and he's going to explain a little bit more about that prayer. So first of all, in halacha bet, he says, "Ulefichach nashim va'avadim chayavin b'tfilah." So women and slaves who are shehi mitzvat aseh shelo hazman grama, because in the last halacha he mentioned that the biblical obligation of prayer has no fixed time. And therefore, women and slaves who are exempt from time-bound mitzvot are obligated in prayer. And that's why these halachot might be a little bit familiar. Anybody who's been to a class in women's obligation in prayer, this is a constantly quoted halacha, because according to the Rambam, women have a biblical obligation to pray daily, because it is not a time-bound mitzvah. And I'm just going to mention briefly, parenthetically here, that the Ramban, Nachmanides, has, he argues with this, and he says that actually prayer is only a biblical command, is a rabbinic commandment, and he disagrees with the Rambam. So if you hear of a dispute between the Rambam and the Ramban, it's based on here, but that's not what we're going to be discussing here. I really brought this halacha for the next part of the halacha, which is אלא חיוב מצווה זו, כך הוא, שיהא אדם מתחנן ומתפלל בכל יום. So he says, the basis of this mitzvah, he's sort of repeating himself. He's saying, this mitzvah is that man should offer supplication and prayer. So tefillah, tachanunim, they're the same word for the Rambam. And how does he do it? So ומגיד שבחו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, ואחר כך שואל צרכיו, שהוא צריך להם, בבקשה ובתחינה, ואחר כך נותן שבח והודיה להשם. So the framework of prayer is that first, man praises God. He gives praise to God. Afterwards, he requests what he needs, and in a form of requesting and beseeching, and that's more of the supplication part. And afterwards, after he makes all of his requests, he gives more praise to God, but this praise is actually hodaya, it's thanks, praise and thanksgiving to God. Al hatova shehishpia lo kol echad lefi kocho. So he gives praise to God for all the good that he has given him, each one according to his strength. So we're gonna stop sharing for a minute. So that is the biblical framework of prayer, is that one, basically, to be a prayer, someone has to do three things: praise God, ask God for something, and thank God. So I was talking to my kids about this the other day and said, you know what, when I tell you to daven in the morning, you could say, wow, those rainbows are really beautiful. God made incredible rainbows in my world. Please don't make me go to Zoom school today. Thank you, God, for giving us good food to eat. And that's it. You have fulfilled your biblical obligation of prayer. And what is that also, but just expressing those things in words creates a connection between you and God. Because the first part, the shevach, the praise of God, I mean, and as I was preparing this shiur, I started thinking about it a little bit more. We have praise at the beginning and praise at the end, but the praise at the end is more like thanks. And what's the difference? Like, how can you articulate praise of the praise of God before you make a request and praise of God after you make a request? So I like to think of it as the first one, shevach, is praise of God that's not dependent on anything. It's things out there in the world, all the incredible, amazing things that we see in our world. But the shevach and the hodaya at the end of the prayer, after we've made our requests, are dependent. They're dependent on our requests being answered. Even if our requests aren't, even if the specific things that we asked for today are not answered or are answered in the negative, I mean, we don't always get whatever we ask for, we can still find things to be thankful for. And this is also when I was thinking about creating a meaningful practice. A lot of times during the beginning of lockdown, a lot of people were talking about making gratitude lists and finding concrete things to be thankful for. And this really helps us ground our lives and in concrete things. So if you can find concrete things to thank God for, so that kind of praise and thanksgiving is connected to us, to a person. So I would say that the first praise is not connected to anything specific, or it's more general and all world encompassing. And the praise and thanksgiving at the end of the prayer is more personally connected, or connected to actual events that happen to me or happen to a people or people we know. And then bakasha, I think, like for some people, the request is the easy part. We have a long laundry list of things. to ask for. There was another source. One second. We're going to go back to the source sheet. Remind me what I was going to say. So the Rambam is actually basing his definition of prayer on a Gemara. This is in Brachot, in the Talmud Bavli. It says, Darash Rabbi Simlai, Leolam Yisader Adam Shivcho Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Va'achar Kach Yitpalel. So this idea that you have to first praise God and only afterwards pray. So I'm saying that prayer is defined as praise, request, and thanksgiving, but shevach, bakasha, and hodaya. But here in the Gemara, they're saying the shevach is actually not the prayer. You have to do this shevach, this praise, before the tefillah. So why do we have to do that? Minalan, from where do we learn that from? Mi Moshe, from Moshe Rabbeinu, dichtiv, ve'etchanan el Hashem ba'et hahi. So Moshe's prayer, his famous prayer when he was praying for himself and not for all of Israel, was when he really wanted to go into the land of Israel, and he's begging God to let him into the land of Israel. Uchtiv, and it says in the pasuk, Hashem Elokim, ata hachilota laharot et abdecha, et godlecha ve'et yadcha hachazaka, asher mi'el bashamayim uva'aretz, asher ya'asecha ma'asecha ukigvuratecha. So first, before his prayer, he says, that Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heavens or on earth who can perform deeds such as yours and your might? So first he says that, and then uchtiv batre, only afterwards he makes his request. He says, so afterwards he makes his request. So that's how we learn that you have to have the praise section first, and only then asking God for something. Anybody who's listened to a shiur from me knows that I really love Sefaria. Sefaria is the Jewish library online. It's how I made the source sheet. And you can also look at source sheets that other people have made. So I was going through different source sheets about prayer, and somebody had an interesting title of, what, do we need to butter up God? Like, it seems like from that source, it would seem like, oh, we want to get something out of God. So we say, oh, God, you're so great. Can you please give me what I want? But I don't think that that's the purpose. Like, you could look at it that way. But I think that the purpose of praising God is to show that really everything belongs to God, the entire world. I guess this is as good a place of any, is looking, well, we're going to look at the standardized prayers. What I mentioned before was, if you were just praying on your own and not looking at the standardized prayers, you can come up with this pattern of shevach, bakasha, and hodaya on your own. The rabbis have instituted actual prayers with Hebrew words and in a set order, because for several reasons. First of all, it's not easy to always come up with something new to say. And also, I think, the next halacha in the Rambam that we're going to look at says that when people were sent into exile and didn't know Hebrew as well, and were confused about things, it was hard for them to pray. And also, when people are praying on their own, it's you don't know exactly what to say. So the rabbis instituted prayer, and the Gaonim in the 7th, 8th century started setting a prayer book. And one of the things, so the structure of our prayer follows this pattern of praise, requests, and thanksgiving. it's most apparent in the shacharit service, in the morning service, because the praise section is all of Psukei de Zimra, which is actually a long section with a lot of Tehillim, a lot of psalms, leading up to the main event of the Shmona Esrei, the silent Amida. And then afterwards you have Aleinu and Ashrei, and that's also the Hodaya. So the larger prayer service follows this pattern of Shevach, Bakasha, and Hodaya, and the core of the service, the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, also follows this pattern. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Oh, the reason that I wanted to mention that here was because why was I mentioning that here? Oh, why we need Shevach. So if you look at Psukei de Zimra, which is made up of many beautiful psalms, and there are psalms that talk about God creating the world. Like the beginning of Psukei de Zimra is Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. Blessed is God who said a word and created the world. So that kind of praise of God puts us in a mindset of we are approaching the boss, like the one who is in charge of everything. If there's anybody out there that can give me what I want, give me my request, that's him. So the point of the shevach, of the praise, is to put us in the correct mindset for making our request. It's not to say, we'll say a lot of nice things about you and then you'll give us what we want. Rather, it's to acknowledge that the only person who can give us what we want is God. Okay, and now we're going to read the next halakha, which it explains more about the development of the Shmona Esrei. So this is halakha Daled. I skipped halakha Gimel, which I forget what it talks about. I also skipped the first half of halakha Daled, which just explains how the Jews went into exile and couldn't really speak Hebrew anymore, and didn't know how to pray. So because of all of that, וכיוון שראה עזרא ובית דינו, כך עמדו ותיקנו להם 18 ברכות. So at first I mentioned that the Gaonim, which are like 7th, 8th century CE, instituted the Sidur that we have today, but actually much, much earlier, in the time, the Rambam is saying it's from the time of Ezra and his court. That is, Mrs. Cutleroff is gonna get me about which century BCE this is, but it's in the Second Temple period. So about so let's say 587, so 5th century BCE, 4th, 5th century BCE. So Ezra, this is after they've gone into exile in Babylon, and part of the Jews have come back to Israel, but still Hebrew was not the language of the people anymore. So, and I think that's what I skipped. I think that's what I skipped in Halakha Gimel, was that you can pray in any language, but there is definitely a preference for praying in Hebrew. So after the language was all mixed up, so Ezra and his court tiknu lahem 18 brachot al haseder. So Ezra and his court invented or created these 18 blessings in their order. Now, we're going to see that these 18 blessings also follow our pattern of Shevach, Bakasha, and Hodaya. So, Shalosh Rishonot, Shevach LaHashem. So the first 3 blessings are praise of God. V'shalosh Achronot, Hodaya. And the last 3 blessings are thanksgiving. Now, this is going to be homework for some of you. The next time you open up your shiur and you pray, or if you just, before you pray, you can open up your shiur and look at it, see how you think the first three blessings are praise, and the last three are thanksgiving. One of the last three is very easy to say it's thanksgiving because it says, Modim anachnu lach, we thank you, God. The one I personally have not been able to figure out is how Sim Shalom is Thanksgiving, because to me it always seems like another request. So at the end, if anybody has any ideas about that, I'll be happy to hear it. But clearly, following the pattern, the first three are praise and the last three are thanksgiving. The emtayot and all of the blessings in the middle, which we know are actually 19 and not, well, there's, let's see if there's three, 6. So there's actually 13 in the middle and not 11 and not 12 because they added a blessing later. So all of the middle ones, behen she'elat kol hadvarim shehen kmo avot lechol chefte ish ve'ish letzorchei hatzibur kulan. So these middle blessings are all kinds of requests. Like a person, one person might not need all of these different things, but they made a broad range of requests so that it fits into everybody in the whole community. There's something for everyone. And why did they do this? Kedei sheyu aruchot b'fi hakol v'yilmedu otan v'tiyeh tfilat elu ha'ilgim tfilah shlema k'tfilat ba'alei lashon hatecha. So they organized Shmona Esrei that it would be a set blessing, every single one, so that even people that didn't speak Hebrew fluently could have a fluent prayer. Because when you have the words in front of you, even if you're not familiar with them, after you've said them a couple of times, it gets more fluid and more fluent. So the set prayers are kind of an evening out factor, an equalizing factor. Right. So I'm not going to read the end of it, basically saying that's why we have organized prayer. So I just want to go over this point one more time, that prayer is praise, request, thanksgiving. And the Rambam already told us that we don't have to pray any set number of times a day, but then when the rabbis instituted prayer 3 times a day, each of the 3 prayers fits that framework. So the shorter prayers, like Mincha is the shortest prayer possible, and there's Ashrei at the beginning, which is Sheva, which is praise. Then the Shmona Esrei fits in the middle, and that whole thing falls under the section of Bakasha, of requests. And then Hodaya is at the end, which is Aleinu. So that's the shortest possible prayer. But actually, you could just say the Amidah, because the Shmona Esrei itself fits in the same way, because the first 3 brachot are the Shevach, then the middle is the Bakasha, and the last 3 brachot is the Amidah, is the Hodaya. So you don't actually need to open with Ashrei and end with Aleinu. If you're really pressed for time, you could just say Shmona Esrei, and that fits the whole thing. So now I think we've sort of gotten an idea of what are the necessary components of prayer. But then we might have a different problem. People who pray on a regular basis sometimes get prayer burnout. I mean, that's the drawback of having these set words, that we have to say the same words every single day. And the next couple of sources I brought are addressing this. So there's 2 Mishnayot. A Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which you might be familiar with, says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Heve Zahir b'kriyat Shema u'v'tfilah, u'kshe'ata mitpalel, al ta'as tfilatcha keva. Ela rachamim v'tachanunim lifnei hamakom baruch hu. So Rabbi Shimon says, be very careful with prayer, with Kriyat Shema and with prayer. When you're praying, don't make your prayer fixed. So we're going to talk about that. What does it mean to make a fixed prayer? Rather, you should make it asking for mercy and supplication. Here's that word again, tachanunim, that we saw in the Rambam, that somehow this is synonymous with prayer, these supplications. So it should be supplications before God. Shene'emar, from a pasuk in Yoel, ki chanun v'rachum hu, er chapayim v'rav chesed v'nicham al hara'ah, v'al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmacha. Okay, that's actually not related. But basically, we need to have supplication before God and not make our prayer a fixed prayer. And again, we have the same thing in a Mishnah in Brachot. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ha'oseh tfilato keva, ein tfilato tachnunim. This is an even clearer expression of this problem, because Rabbi Eliezer says that one who makes his prayer fixed, that prayer is by definition not a supplication. It's not tachanunim. And we're trying to go for tachanunim. So how do we reconcile this, the need for fixed prayer? Because we need to have, we're not fluent in our prayers before God, so we need to have these fixed words, but how do we still make them tachanunim? And the Gemara in Brachot, the Gemara on this Mishnah that I quoted says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ha'oseh tfilato keva. Okay, that's the quote from the Mishnah. My keva. So in the Gemara, they also didn't understand what exactly is this keva, that we don't want our prayer to be keva. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Ibi, Amar Rabbi Oshaya, kol shetfilato domeh alav kemasui. So anyone whose prayer is a burden on himself, so that's considered keva. So it's not necessarily the words. You could say the same words every day, but if you're happy to say them and if they mean something to you, I mean, they could mean something different to you every day. That would, but if prayer is burdensome, so that's keva, and that's what we don't want. V'Rabbanan Amri, there's another opinion. Of course, there's not only one opinion about what is keva. V'Rabbanan Amri, kol mi she'eino omra bilashon tachanunim. So Rabbanan, the rabbis, it sounds kind of tautological here. So obviously anyone who doesn't say the words as supplication, so it's not supplication, it's keva. But if we think about that a little bit more, it's if you're just saying something by rote, if it's meaningless for you, so then that's not tachanunim. Rabba v'Rav Yosef, so two other chachamim, Rabba and Rav Yosef, da'amri tarvaihu, both of them say, kol she'eino yachol lechadesh ba'davar. So what's keva? Keva is you say exactly the same thing that you said yesterday. You don't have anything new. But you could see that even in your, even if you say the same words, you can say them in a different way. You can say them in a different meaning, and that could be something new. Amar Rabbi Zera, Ana yechilhu lechidushe ba'milta umistafina dimale mitzidirna. So Rabbi Zera argues with them, and he says, but of course I could come up with something new to say every day, but then I would get confused. Like, how much do you want me to renew my prayer, and how much am I just supposed to be saying what I'm supposed to be saying? So he's kind of suggesting that maybe trying to read something new into the words every day is not such a good thing because it would confuse you. And then Abaye says, in a totally different direction, Abaye bar Abin v'Rabbi Chanina bar Abin da'amri tarvaihu kol she'en mitpalel im dimdumei chama. So he says, what's keva? The keva that you're not supposed to do is if you don't pray when the sun is reddening, meaning that you don't pray at sunrise or at sunset. Basically, Abaye is saying that the proper time for prayer is when the sun rises and when the sun sets, which it's also sort of counterintuitive, because that really seems like a fixed time. If we said keva means fixed, then if you, but anyway, that's his meaning of keva, which is not actually what I want to be talking about. Because what I want to talk about is the other interpretations of keva. So we would think that if we're saying the same words every single day, that maybe that's not the best kind of prayer, because it's the same thing. But we just saw several different suggestions of how to take the same words and say them differently. So you could have, you could infuse different kind of meaning into the words. Even if you can't infuse different meanings, even if you say the exact same words every single day, if you're aware that you're beseeching God and you say them in a way of tachanunim, of pleading, that it could really infuse your prayer with the feeling of prayer. And that's really what we're going for, is this feeling of prayer. So part of that also is understanding the words of the prayer. If you actually, so when I was explaining before that Psukei de Zimra, the introductory part of the service, is shevach, if you're somebody that either understands the Hebrew or if you're reading along in the English, you see that those are words of praise. And it can help you to say tachnunit, to really plead for something from God if you know what you're saying. So first of all, like we said, the Rambam says it's perfectly okay to pray in any language that you feel comfortable in. So there's nothing wrong with reading the prayer book in English. Going back to what I was saying at the beginning, that I really feel comfortable with the High Holiday liturgy because I notice that really the High Holiday liturgy is just an extension of everything that we say every single day. So if we're familiar with the words that we're saying on a daily basis, then a lot of the words on the High Holidays are the same. Yeah, we add more things on top of that, but the basis of everything is the same thing that we say all the time. And again, that might be an advantage to saying the same words every day, because you get familiar with it and they're fluid. So something that's fluid is not necessarily keva. That's another thing to think about. To sort of round up here, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from Rav Steinsaltz's book. I copied these out. So I just pulled a couple of quotes from his chapter on prayer. So he says, prayer is like setting a date, which depends on finding the time and the place. And when it is set up, one comes. So this is part of the importance of creating a daily prayer practice. I mean, he was talking about it in the context of having 3 set prayers a day. But even if you're not going to pray 3 times a day, if you say at least once a day, I'm going to address God, and I'm going to, sometimes it's also helpful to create for yourself a prayer corner. Like, I know that daily I'm going to come here and address God. Then you don't have to sort of worry about, what am I going to say? The time is now, and I'll show up. So that's, really the first part of creating a prayer practice. Then he says, in order to focus successfully on what he is saying, a person must find his words meaningful for him. Not something that is entirely incomprehensible, nor something that is so well known that it has lost any meaning. So this is what I was talking about keva. So on the one hand, we need standardized prayers that are set out so that we're not tripping over our words. But on the other hand, it's not so well known that it's lost any meaning. It should be meaningful to us. As our sages state, a person's prayer must be new. It must have a fresh perspective and meaning, and not merely repeat yesterday's prayers. And if we think back to our section of Shevach, Bakasha, and Hodaya, so when I was trying to have a gratitude practice with my kids, and we had, 3 things to be grateful for a day. Sometimes you can repeat the same things, but you can always find at least one thing that's new to be grateful for every day. Even within the same words of prayer, you can find new ways to say them, or new meaning, something that might be meaningful to you today that wasn't yesterday. And then what do we get out of prayer? I guess this is moving towards the conclusion here. Once we have created a meaningful prayer practice, Rav Steinsaltz says the value of a person's prayer lies not in how much he cried out, how much he swayed, nor even how strong his emotions were, but in what remains of his experience after the prayers are over. And that's sort of why I also feel like this was a good class to give after the high holidays and not necessarily before, because we've just been through this month of prayer, of a lot of davening, either davening at home, davening in shul, and you know, during when we're going through the process, we're thinking we're doing tshuva, we're going to change ourselves. But what's left? Now it's the day after. It's Achrei HaChagim. We're now starting real life. What do we take away from us? We're not in the height of prayer anymore. This is the everyday. So what do we take out of it? And a true, what Rav Steinsaltz is saying is that a true prayer has that lingering effect. It changes you and it touches you. And I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Does anyone have questions, comments? You can open your microphones. If anyone wants to share a memory of Abba, you're also welcome to.
Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yedida, I wanted to say thank you, and this was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I really hope that it recorded well. I'm going to upload it afterwards when I check it.
No, it was
Can
really.
I
Thank you, Yedida. It was great.
Yedida, I just wanted to add one more thing, that you really refreshed a lot of things, and it was
Yes.
it added a lot of meaning to my tefillah now. I feel like
the
fact that you talked about how you take the words and you add a new meaning to it. I think it means a lot learning that tonight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the pitom, like if I have a moment of concentration, that moment of concentration in tefillah is like, that is the new meaning.
Right.
Kind of.
For sure.
So that's beautiful. So thank you.
I really recommend this book. And I mean, he goes into a lot more about concentration and he has like 3 specific methods of improving your prayer. And it's very, very interesting. They also have it in Hebrew. It's called, I forget what it's called in Hebrew, but it exists. It was written in Hebrew. It just was translated.
Oh.
So.
Who wrote it?
Thank you.
Rav Steinsaltz.
That's Rav Steinsaltz. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Joseph, you want to
I will add, Yedida. And obviously I had the privilege of knowing your father for many years, and he's very much missed here in Memphis. But the main thing I think about with your dad is really just the joy with which he did everything. Like I always picture him, you know, with kind of like a spring in his step and a smile on his face, you know, whether it was going to shul or being a dad. You know, just everything he did was done with joy and vigor and energy, and he's very much missed here.
Thank you. Thank you, Amira. Thanks for joining in. And I know a lot of people always said that that's when they really miss him, is on Simchat Torah. And I don't know what he would have done this year on Simchat Torah. So maybe, you know, it's everything in its right time. So,
Yedida.
Yes.
It's Eddie here. I'm breaking the law with Leah, breaking the law with Leah Noam.
You're within 1 kilometer of their house.
Well, we're not supposed to really be together, are we? So, you know, I think your parents would have really enjoyed that shiur very much.
Oh.
Knowing them, I think it would have been a very special a very special time for them to hear you teaching, and for them to, sure, they never fulfilled their dream in their lifetime, but remember, Terach left Ur and went and to Haran, and then Abraham is the one who continued to the land of Israel, and so for them to have to have experienced this study with you, in not in many ways, in every way, you and bracha are the fulfillment of that aspect of their dream and their lives, and that's what it boils down to, and it's very special to be with you right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Joseph said he had something
Yeah,
for
Joseph,
Shalom.
I'm curious to hear.
So if you look at Sim Shalom, you've read the book, I presume, maybe not the most rabbinic of sources, but How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
And the way in which you win friends and influence people is by showing why it's to their benefit. And so the part we have after this one, right, where we say, here's our personal prayer, and then Oselaman, Oselaman, Oselaman. You want to fulfill our prayer because it's to your benefit to do so. Well, Sim Shalom seems like a precursor to that. You ask for peace, but not because you want peace. You ask for peace because it demonstrates God's attributes in this world. And because God naturally has such attributes, of course he'd want to give you peace. And so it's a bracha that's very closely intertwined with the concept of praise. And so I think it could.
But why would you put that in Thanksgiving? I would see why you would put that in praise. You couldn't put it in the first three because the first three are taken up already.
Well, I guess I kind of think of Thanksgiving as also being a part of the wrap up. Praise as being part of the wrap up. But I'll have to think about Thanksgiving a bit more.
No, but I guess maybe I could answer my own question, because if I'm defining Thanksgiving as praise that's connected with people, then peace among peoples of the world is clearly connected to people. It's not something that's sort of ex nihilo. I would think the praise beforehand is more connected to nature and disconnected from actual people. So
let me give another try at it. A definition we give modim, and it's often connected with the concept of kingship, because it's an honor to serve a king. It's not that the king has power; it's that it's an honor to serve the king, and so there's an honor in being present before HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we say modim. And so if you're looking at Sim Shalom, we're asking for peace, but at the same time, it is an honor to be in the presence of Hashem, who wants peace and who wants bracha. And so you're tying perhaps all three concepts in: the praise, thanksgiving, and supplication.
Yeah.
Restaurant is supposed to be it.
Thank you. I thought you might have something.
Can I add one?
Yeah, for sure. My father-in-law, Bob Rosenstein.
I think Sim Shalom is a funny one because the beautiful bracha, of course. It's at the end because, look, most of the brachot in the middle, Salachla, Rifa'enu, Lamal Shinim, they all are looking for something that is not always here. It seems Shalom is a status quo. It's like it's assuming, of course, we're not in the time of war, but it's leave things like they are. Let us have parnasah. Let us. It's peaceful. Most people have an enormous difficulty imagining tomorrow different from yesterday. It's just inconceivable. Why should tomorrow? Something new happening. It could be COVID. It could be anything. It's like an earthquake. It's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So when we have peace, it's a Thanksgiving. It's like, thank God things are not changing. We're at peace. Leave it that way. It is Thanksgiving more than please bring us peace because we're fighting. It's more like please leave us in peace.
Or leave the stagnant waters to keep right, like that it shouldn't get too much of a tide there.
Yeah.
Well,
it reminds me of the rainbow behind you. Just like Hashem's promised us that that He won't bring bring any other mabul like he did but in our history.
Right.
So too that same it's him standing by his word also that he'll have that peace on earth for all people, for all mankind too.
Oh, and I forgot to mention at the beginning, I told Cindy, but I forgot to mention that I learned this in the Rambam, but I was first introduced to these concepts in Rabbi Menachem Nissel's class in 7th grade in Memphis. And he wrote an excellent book on tefillah. It's specifically women's tefillah. It's called Rigshay Lev. And it's really an excellent book also where I got the foundation of a lot of these concepts. Recommended. Okay, thank you very much. Have a
Thank
good
you,
evening.
Yedida. Thank you very
Laila
much.
Tov.
Laila Tov.